Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with California-based jazz percussionist, composer, and bandleader Ian Dogole. He opened up at length about his new 2022 CD, Quinta Essentia, which is his 9th release. This album evokes the presence of an element that transcends the four common physical elements of earth, water, air, and fire, and exists in its purest form. He has spent more than 40 years creating music that defies category and knows no boundaries. While in high school outside of Philadelphia, PA, he was captivated by an album cover that called to him to explore the music inside. It was Brew by Miles Davis. We get into all of this, the beginning, middle, and now, and much more. Enjoy this interview.
Let's go ahead, and before we get into your newest album, I want to know, how did you survive COVID, this period of lockdown and just not knowing what was going on as an artist? How did you make it through, and how did the process subsequently change the way that you approach not only music but your life?
Well, COVID's been difficult for me. In addition to being a musician, I'm a professional copywriter and web designer. And the pandemic severely affected, like so many others, the musical side because in addition to performing, I am also a music educator, not so much in terms of private students, but going into schools and leading improvisational bands. So I direct bands, I compose all the music that they play, and I like to expose, and you could look at these as jazz bands, sort of, but I really like to get students exposed to music from other parts of the world, and so I like to expose them to music from the Middle East and from Africa and from South America and Indonesia, for example, and have them play scales and rhythms from other parts of the world, but improvise. And all of that got shut down on a dime, like in March of 2020. And I've never been able to get back in since then. So it really put a severe crimp not only on the performance side, but it really just really eliminated the music education side, and still have not been able to really get that back up and going. So in that sense, the pandemic persists for me in a challenging way. And one of the reasons I actually really loved doing the Quinta Essentia project is that it all took place during the pandemic. If we even think of it as being over at this point, which it's really not. So it did affect me very much in terms of being able to survive on the musical side. I still, the writing and the web design is a remote scenario, so I'm able to have that continue, but very challenging, psychically on many levels. It was, I don't know really what else to say about it, except that I haven't fully recovered from it, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to get an overview. So with the brand new album you said was kind of an outgrowth of that time period, talk to me about how it feels to be able to have music now. I know that the pandemic and maybe the disease isn't over, but as far as like the world waking up, that's definitely happening. So how does this release feel right now in particular to have it out?
Well, it's sort of like a reemergence for me because since I wasn't able to perform live, I was able to do one concert in the middle of the pandemic, in I guess it was July of 2021, when there was a little ebb, and people were starting to get out for the first time, but it was. Let me just think how I want to say this. Getting musicians into the studio and really just kind of revving up the engines again and having this creative process going, it was a lifesaver for me on I guess on a psychic level to because having the experience of collaborating with musicians in a live context was gone, and so this was a chance to kind of integrate my jazz meets world music approach to what I'm putting out there, and it was very uplifting to just be able to get into the studio and have that creative process, and a lot of this music, I hadn't put out a record in 10 years, and so the other thing was it seemed like the appropriate time to re-engage because I had, it's like I'm not getting any younger, and it was really important to take all these musical ideas that have been percolating inside of me and get them out while I still have the energy and the bandwidth to do it. And so it was very fortuitous just to be able to go into a wonderful studio in Oakland, California, and bring in these great musicians and play music that is, as you know from listening to it, it's not music that is constrained by any particular genre. It crosses into a lot of different arenas, bringing in influences from North Africa, and in this case, doing a special tribute piece to the Ukrainian people, and doing an unusual combination for cello and kalimba in a Ukrainian Dorian mode, and anyway, it was a lifesaver for me because without that project, I'm not sure how I would have gotten through this whole period, because without the education and the live performance, it's like this was it, and it had been percolating for 10 years, and so, for example, the piece my tribute piece to Randy Weston, The Gathering, which little story behind that, and was one of the reasons I wanted to really get this out at this time. In 2016, I did a tribute concert to Randy Weston called Afro Weston, and one of the musicians involved in the project or on that piece is Yassir Chadli, who is Ganawa from Morocco, and Yassir was very much involved with Randy's album entitled The Spirits of Our Ancestors in 1991. And when I reached out to Randy to let him know I was doing this performance, and I write a lot of grants, and so I had written a grant for this, and I said, I want to do your music that really is very tied into your African roots. So this was not about doing high fly or doing his pieces that were most well known, but really getting into some of the pieces that really drew from the Ganawa or the West African side. And when Randy heard that Yassir was a part of that equation, he became very interested in what I was doing, because it's like he was really fascinated that I was really into the Ganawa music, and as he learned later, also music from Nubia. And so he started sending me handwritten charts and was very involved in the process. And I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's an interesting story. And so then when we did the concert, I think it was like April of 2016, the same night we did the concert, he was doing a concert at Carnegie Hall for his 90th birthday with his African Rhythms ensemble. And he announced my concert to his attendees, and the set list that he played that night was largely the same tunes that I played in my concert.
Wow, that's wonderful. Randy is a wonderful person. I've just always been in awe of his music and how he thinks and how he rolls, how he did roll. He was a wonderful person.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about this on a walk the other day, that musicians who have gravitas and who don't expend wasted motion in their music. And another musician whom I got to know a little bit over the years as well was Yusef Lateef. And I think of those two musicians and as musicians that I've admired for decades. And in fact, Yusef was one of the first musicians I ever listened to playing what we call jazz, conveniently, who have that gravitas, and they can play just a couple of notes and they penetrate your soul. And Randy is the same way. He can hit something on his left hand down low on the piano and just let it ring, and that's all I need to hear for a while. While the rest of the musicians are playing, Randy just, there was something just so profound and impactful about his music, and the fact, because I love music from all the cultures across the planet, and that goes back to my early ethnomusicology studies at Brown University. All the indigenous music from Africa that he brought in, and the way that he integrated that into what is otherwise thought of as jazz is very important to me, because I've been advocating for my whole adult life for the integration and connection of music from around the world, the melting pot of cultures, as it integrates with jazz, because jazz was born out of the melting pot. And I feel sometimes that we might lose that a little bit, and people want to try to box jazz in a little bit into some sort of tight, categorize it. And one of the things to me as I look at jazz or creative improvised music in general is that you have this whole universe of possibilities with scales and rhythms and instruments from other cultures that you can bring into the jazz equation and create these wonderful hybrids. And people like Yusef was doing it in the 50s. And Randy was, and Sun Ra was doing it in the 50s and 60s, and so that really speaks to me, is this honoring of all the musical traditions, and there's no reason why jazz should not embrace that. And I would love to see more programmers embrace the multicultural influence on jazz, because it's just so fascinating, and I think it would really expand listeners' horizons.
So speaking of that multifaceted approach and the listeners, what are you hoping the listener gets from this new album?
Well, as I put on the title, that's a great question, by the way. As I put on the title of the record, about, music for healing and uplift, I mean, that's my goal. There's nothing really, there's nothing real intellectual that I'm trying to put out there about it. I really, other than honoring, the jazz tradition and, traditions of music cultures from around the world and how they integrate with jazz, the real underlying purpose for me is to try to energize and uplift and expand, and hope I can take people on a journey that opens some new portals for them as they listen to this music, and share it with as many people as possible. And it's really that basic for me. And also, and I'm sure this is true for every musician that you talk to, every musician comes at their music with a certain viewpoint that is unique to them. I mean, we're all derivative of lots of things, as we put our concept together, but I think all of us are trying to take something that's deep inside of us and share it with as many people as possible. And for me, it really is that basic. And at the same time, as I said, if I can get, just take people, it's not about impressing people. It's about just trying to take them on a journey and have them travel somewhere that they haven't been before. And if I can reach a few people that way, that makes me feel good about, everything I put into this to get it out there.
And speaking of a journey, it all begins for us somewhere. What was the first live show that you ever saw that really inspired you and made you want to live your life to be a musician?
Ooh, boy. I'd have to go way back and think about that one because I know, it's interesting. I think that it's easy. It's funny. It's easier for me to think about recordings I listen to than the live shows that influence me to be a musician. And I'm just trying to think of the early shows. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, Sun Ra, with the Sun Ra Orchestra was living in the Germantown section, and Marshall Allen is still leading the band and still living in his father's house in Germantown. And I know, or seeing Sun Ra early on, and seeing Pharoah Sanders early on. I remember seeing Miles Davis at Paul's Mall in Boston in the early 70s, and so some of those performances. And if I really had a chance to really reflect right now, I'm sure other performances. I saw here are two of them. Okay. So there was a place in West Philadelphia, a funky little place called the Aqua Lounge, not too far from the University of Pennsylvania campus. And in 72, 72, I saw two concerts there that really, I'd have to say, were as impactful as anything I can think of. One was Yusef Lateef, and I had already gotten the Blue Yusef Lateef, if you're familiar with that recording. I think it was from 1968. And I was really just very, very intoxicated by his approach to the music and bringing in other cultures. And there might have been 6 people in the audience, and I was there for, 4 hours, feeling like I was just in a living room listening to Yusef and sitting 6 feet away from him and just completely mesmerized. The other one, which was a packed house in the same place, but an unforgettable concert, was Herbie Hancock's M1 Band. And that group, I believe, put out 3 recordings, if I'm not mistaken. And I that's my favorite Herbie Hancock group that he ever had. And this was the Pre-Headhunters band. And I was just so taken with, again, there was a lot of African influence in the music, and it was hard. It's really, you couldn't categorize that music. It's not like it's just a traditional jazz recording. This music was really reaching into new places that maybe Bitches Brew had sort of opened the door to a lot of this, but this was really going into some new directions. And I love that, Eddie Henderson, Benny Maupin, and Julian Priester, when they weren't playing their horns, they were all playing percussion instruments. And so the whole band would go on to this real African percussion kind of thing for long periods of time. And I wasn't even playing percussion at that point. I was studying jazz guitar at this point, so I hadn't even picked up any percussion instruments. But I was so smitten by what I was hearing at that time. And so, I would say from the standpoint of live performances, that would be, those would be a few of them. Now, and I'll just very quickly go to this because you didn't ask this, but tangentially, the recordings that really got me going and really got me thinking about, going into down the path of creating music the rest of my life that I could share with others was, Bitches Brew was the most powerful record for me. And I bought that record right after it came out in 1970, it was like 69, 70, because of the album cover, not because I had any clue what was actually on the record. I saw the cover and I said, oh, I want this. And then I could never stop listening to it. And then, and it was interesting because I had been listening to a lot of the rock bands who were coming through Philly and playing at the Spectrum where all the sports teams were playing for the first time. And then I heard the Modern Jazz Quartet, and I heard Yusef Lateef, and then I heard Coltrane, and I heard Miles. And within like a year, I went from listening to like Jethro Tull and Led Zeppelin to listening to Albert Ayler and Archie Shepp and Cecil Taylor and Sun Ra, and I did this 180, and then very shortly thereafter was exposed to Chinese and Indian classical music, and like that was it. That was it. It's like I was on my way. I think after I had heard, the innovative jazz players and then the indigenous music from around the world, I think that's the path. I want to go down a path that incorporates elements of both of these, directions.
So you've been at this for a long time, for 40 years. What has been the key to you not only, being relevant, but evolving and developing and looking forward to this profession of both musician and education for all these years?
Yeah, it has been a long road, and it's been a choppy road. I think people who aren't musicians or who aren't artists, because I think this is true for people in all the different disciplines, it can be a very isolated, lonely road, that you go down, because you have to develop a bit of a thick skin to do this sort of thing, and you have to believe really deeply in your art form and your voice, regardless of whatever affirmation or lack of affirmation that you get, throughout the years. And I know when I started my first group, when I moved to California in 1978, at that point to go to Stanford University to ostensibly work on a PhD in classics, so I was studying Latin and ancient Greek, I formed a band, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. All the musicians in the band were way more further developed at that point than I was, and trial and error was really kind of I was trying to compose tunes and playing some other, people's tunes. People in the band were writing music, and I was very unsure of myself, and it was really kind of a bumpy stretch there in the early days when I put my first few recordings out, to really feel more centered and confident and feel like I was, this was something that I was going to continue doing the rest of my life. And it was really a gradual process where I think I had to learn to relax, actually, because when you're feeling very uncertain, you tend to be a little jittery and indecisive in what you're doing. And I guess that's true for just about everything. But over time, I just became a little more relaxed and more assured and feeling that whatever response I got from the outside, it's like I was just going to sort of let the chips roll wherever they did and just believe that this is what I'm here to do. I'm here to take this path that I've gone down all these years and bringing in all the multicultural music influences and playing all these instruments from Africa, the Middle East, and South America, and doing the combinations of instruments that are rarely heard together, and just feeling like it's okay. Whatever happens with each recording, whatever happens with each live performance, I celebrate the collaborative efforts with all these fellow musician adventurers, and consider that a blessing unto itself. And if there are some good things that happen, opportunities that open up after putting recordings out or doing live performances, or even those wonderful experiences working with students, that's gravy for me at this point, because my expectations have certainly been tempered from my 20s and 30s when I saw, it was more about getting exposure and hoping that certain things would open up. And, at this point, it's like it's no longer about that. It's like it really is about just creating with wonderful musicians and having those ecstatic experiences when we're live or in the studio. And then fortunately through people like yourself who might resonate with the music when you hear it, sharing it with their listeners, and just hope that, we can uplift people with it.
So everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of you. Who do you think you are?
Wow. That's a challenging question. It's like, who do I think I am? Can you be more specific with that question?
Well, it's all about perception. I mean, your family's going to see you in one light. Your friends will see you in another light. Your, colleagues, students, those that get your music, you cast all these different lights out. But ultimately, you're the one in control of what you are, your aura, who you are. So just very simply put, who do you think you are?
I just, I think, I'll tell you how I think of myself. I think of myself as a vessel through which some vision is flowing through me that I don't really take credit for it. It's like something has just flown through me, is flowing through me, and I feel, very humbled by having whatever this gift is that I have, that I can share with other people. And really, I just look at myself as somebody who's here to, and I say this is sort of redundant because I said this early on, but really I'm here to just try to uplift people and try to take them to new places and try to expand their horizons and open up new pathways for them. And I don't really look at it from an egotistical standpoint. One of the things I've learned over many years and through many disappointments in this journey is the more I can take the ego out of it, the more I can just be as authentic as I can be with this music. And so I don't know if this really answers your question, because it's a really challenging question to answer. And I frankly, I don't spend much time thinking about that, so I apologize if I didn't really articulate that very clearly, because that's something I might have to ruminate on for a few hours before I could really have a, kind of a clear answer to that.
It's more of a kind of a cerebral, guttural response to this. I think sometimes it kind of comes across as something that, requires a lot, but I think simplicity with the answer to this is usually the most poignant. So I think you hit it right on the head. I think you had a great answer. And that was it. I saved the hot seat question for last. So thank you for opening up about the music, your life in music. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and for sharing the music with your listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Philadelphia, California, Kansas City, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Ian for his time, music, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on either Spotify or iTunes. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.